All right. Hi, Natalie.
Hey,
I'm
how
so
are you?
I'm awesome. How are you today?
Good, really good.
I'm so excited that you're here. It's been so great to reconnect with you. Um, it's great. Thanks for giving me some of your time and joining me on Michelle's Conversations That Matter.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much for giving me a chance to talk and to give back somehow.
Awesome. Awesome. My pleasure. My pleasure. So, a little bit about the series for anyone who doesn't know. This is Michelle's Conversations That Matter. And what I'm out to do is really elevate the conversation around mental health. Have people on like yourself who are willing to tell their story and have others maybe feel a little less alone. Have clinicians on to educate us maybe on certain diagnosis that we don't know about. And overall, hopefully inspire people to have a healthy relationship to their brain. Because that's super important when we're trying to make sure people get care and remove the stigma that exists. So, and what I do professionally is I get to work with organizations to recenter employees and really help them get back into the cockpit of their lives. We've been through a rough period with this pandemic, so it's my pleasure to get to support them with things they can do to feel better and preserve their wellness. So that's what I do. So would you be so kind to introduce yourself, Natalie? Tell us who you are, where you live, and what you do.
Sure. My name's Natalie, and I'm going to keep it at that. I actually live in Lancaster, Pennsylvania now, and I'm on disability. And what I do, though, is I've coached people for years. Like that's how we met, right? So like I've coached people. It's always been a mission to help people, to take care of people, to do whatever I can. So that's who I am. It's like in my blood.
Awesome. Yeah. And so let's talk about that. So we met through Landmark Education, Landmark Worldwide, it's called now. And we did work together in this whole self-development space. And that's where I first met you and saw the powerhouse of a woman that you were, helping people do your thing. What's maybe for people who don't know anything about Landmark, share with us maybe something that you really loved about that work that you did.
Oh my gosh, I loved everything about the work that I did with Landmark. I would say that if anybody wanted to get into any kind of a self-development program, Landmark would be the one that I would recommend hands down. And I say that because it's in the area of transformational learning, there can be stuff that's really jarring. And I think that Landmark is the one that is the best for mental health. You know, if you don't know if you have trauma, or you know you do, then Landmark is what I would say the only option for you, because the others I think would jar you up too much.
Right, right. And so that does lead us to our topic today. You were courageous enough to say, Michelle, I want to come on. I want to talk about something that might not be so sexy to talk about, but we're going to talk about trauma. We're going to talk about your personal journey. But why did you want to come on today to share your story around trauma and your personal healing story?
Because I felt so alone when I was going through all of it, and I'm nowhere near done with my journey. But at the beginning of it, I felt so deficient and so weird and so messed up and so broken. And I didn't realize, like it felt weird, and I want to normalize it for people. If one human being out there hears it and hears that you don't have to have had grenades thrown at you to have trauma, then that's what matters to me, is to have someone who might be doubting or might be in a really deep, dark hole to hear that, no, that's probably trauma and there's a way out.
And that you shared that grenade comment. I think a lot of us relate to trauma as something that has to be so severe that it's unimaginable, and therefore it gives us permission to say that we experience trauma. But in reality, trauma is a very personal thing, isn't it?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. What you're saying is so important, because, you can have trauma and have absolutely no recollection of it. Like literally, you can have trauma, and no matter how much counseling you go through, you will never remember the trauma. The only thing you have are the symptoms. So it could come from anything. And what's traumatic to one person may not be to another. You know, for somebody, it could be like my dad's job transferred him and I had to move and I lost all my friends when I was in the 5th grade. Or it could be I'm getting divorced, or it could be anything. And then where it gets even more complicated is when you get into complex PTSD, which is trauma on top of trauma on top of trauma on top of trauma, which is the situation that I found myself in. But here's the thing about it. I would have never told, if you had asked me, like, if I had trauma, I would have absolutely been like, no. And I was in counseling for years. It just wasn't getting anywhere. Like, we've talked about this before, you know, like, we just wasn't getting anywhere. And I do know. It took a suicide attempt for me to realize, like, the help I'm getting isn't helping. I need something bigger, something better. I don't know what to do. And I Googled trauma, and that's what made me start looking for a traumatologist. And that's what's gotten me this far. But I would have never thought that I had trauma. And I mean, keep in mind, if I was to play back for you some of the events of my life, anybody would shake their head and be like, but like, I have some sexual abuse history, some physical abuse history, some emotional abuse history. I have, you know, traumatic events. I had a wedding called off. I lost a house to a sinkhole. You know, I had 3 miscarriages. And the biggest was my own self-inflicted trauma, because I had convinced myself my parents would absolutely hate my guts unless I married a man, had kids, and, you know, lived the American dream. And I tried for 20 years. And then I did Landmark, and you know, without integrity, nothing works. And I was chasing my tail because nothing was working, because the truth of the matter was that there's a big old closet door I had to swing open. And I finally got the courage to do it out of doing a lot of the transformational work, but also in trauma therapy. Trauma therapy.
Educate us about the different types of therapy. You were really passionate when we met about helping people understand that there's different types of support they may not know about. So educate us a little bit about that.
Well, there's your regular, like, psychologist, marriage counselor, thing like that. Then if you're going into trauma, for me, if you're ever going to see any kind of counselor, you want to make sure you see a trauma-informed specialist at the minimum, at the very minimum. If not, there are trauma specialists and there are licensed traumatologists, and that is an entirely different ball of wax, because they actually have to go to special training, get special certifications, and take different tests to know how to handle people who have trauma, because trauma is not an emotional, you know, people think like it's an emotional disease. It's not. Trauma actually changes the shape of your brain. It changes the way that your brain operates. It totally mixes up your sympathetic and your parasympathetic nervous systems. It's all connected. And I would say to anybody listening, if you want to read a good book, The Body Keeps the Score.
Yes. I was just going to lead you there. Like, tell them about the book, because so many people who have experienced trauma cite that book. That book helped them get it. So
yeah, it did. Because it helps you understand, like, so I have multiple sclerosis, right? And I was in really, really, really bad shape like 3 years ago. That was around the time when, a little over 3 years ago, but I had to finally come to terms with who I am and be truthful about who I am. My marriage was completely disintegrated, and I was a mess physically, health-wise. And it wasn't until I cleaned it all up and started healing traumas, like literally addressing them in the way that a traumatologist addresses them is different than a psychologist, because what they do is they have you re-experience it, but they have you reframe the trauma like from an adult perspective. So you have to literally, like, you would write out a trauma of yours in, like, explicit detail, like from the point of view of however old you are, from your eyes. and then you read it back again as if it's happening now, and then you reprocess it with adult skills. So it's a whole different thing than like talk therapy.
Yeah. Amazing. What do you think we, as a society, do you feel like we diminish our traumas as a society? Because I feel like, I don't know, I feel like people don't realize they're struggling and they diminish it because they're comparing it to something that has to be so severe. Do you think that's common? Yeah.
I think it's like painfully common, and people not only like diminish their traumas by, and that's not to diminish the trauma of a soldier, but by believing that only people who have been shot at have PTSD is such a disservice to everybody, because I was a housewife. I was a stay-at-home mom. And if you had asked me if I had trauma, I would have said, no, I've got anxiety and depression, and that's it. And I take medication for that. And that's the answer I would have given you. And that was the answer I gave everybody up until I got to a point where I just felt completely hopeless, and I didn't know what was wrong with me, and I didn't know why I wasn't getting better.
Right.
So I think, but here's the thing, it's because they diminished all of my traumas. Yeah. Like, think about it. Like, everything that I said that happened before isn't small. It's not huge like being a war veteran, but for any one individual to have all things like that happen, that impacts you.
Yeah, it does. Talk to us about the feelings that are associated with trauma. Help us understand what some of those feelings are like.
Hypervigilance, like being very, very, very attuned to your surroundings, and like you can read a room pretty well. Like, you can catch a vibe from a person. You almost within like 10 words, you're like, and you kind of pick it up. With trauma, trust is a huge thing. Defensiveness. And there's a thing about dissociativeness with trauma where a lot of times you don't even recognize it, but you tend to put yourself, like, you try to empathize by telling a story about yourself that's similar, but that's a trauma response. That's like a validating response thing. My rule of thumb, and I guess the thing that I learned and that I would want anybody to know, like, when it's time to go get help is when you feel like you're spinning your wheels and you're getting nowhere. And if you find yourself easily agitated, if you are brought to tears because you're frustrated with yourself, or, you and I have talked about this, but pardon my French, we all have that little itty bitty shitty committee in our head.
Yeah.
When that gets really, really, really loud, it's time to consider you might have trauma, because generally speaking, what that voice is telling you is what you've been brought to believe about yourself. Mm-hmm. So it's not that you should believe anything that voice is saying, right, but you have to learn to recognize that that voice came from something you were given.
Yeah.
Based on your interactions your entire life. So I know that's vague and weird, but
no. I mean, I want to go back to what you started off sharing with us, was when you knew your traditional therapy wasn't working and that you were having suicidal thoughts, right? Oh. So you're having suicidal thoughts, yet you're getting care, but it actually is.
I say this all the time. So it's embarrassing to say, but there was actually a suicide attempt. And I say that on that day, my life both ended and started, because it did. That was the beginning of the end of the suffering. That was the beginning of the end of feeling like I was spinning my wheels, of constantly feeling hurt and like on the verge of tears all the time, constantly feeling I had to be perfect, because if it wasn't perfect, it was just all failed. So it was the beginning of something wonderful, but it had to end something too, right. And in doing that, here's another thing I want to add. If anybody's listening that's a parent, I made a really difficult choice. I was sick. I was really sick. I I was diagnosed with complex PTSD, and I realized that what my kids had been seeing was extraordinarily unhealthy. So the best thing for me was to take myself out of that situation until I was healthy.
Mm-hmm.
I with their dad because I knew that they're good, they're healthy, they're cared for. We did a lot of Zoom calls. The pandemic didn't help anything.
Right.
But it's okay if you're a mom, if you're a caregiver. If you don't take care of you can't take care of anybody. You can't do a darn thing for anybody. So
Right.
don't wait until you're at that point.
Right. So we have a guest watching. We have Susan, past Susan. She's saying hi.
Hey, Susan.
Good to have you. It's great.
So awesome to see you.
Nice to see some Landmark people. So talk to us about, there seems to be a sense of compromised, I guess, self-care. I guess that's probably not the, trauma typically correlates to like self-harm or self-hatred. Talk to us a little bit about that.
Oh yeah. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut in on you. Oh yeah, it's so for some people it's like dissociation. Like they can just completely like go to their happy place and completely dissociate. For some people it's cutting or self-harm. I will personally say that for me, I used to take my nails and dig in and rip my skin off of my arms, which that's why I always had acrylic nails so that I couldn't tear my arms up, because that was my way of self-harming. But there's all different ways, because when I was put in the hospital, I realized I'd been anorexic for 2 years. That is a form of self-harm. An eating disorder is, while it's a mental illness, it's also a form of self-harm because you're not taking care of yourself. You're not giving your body what it needs to think clearly, to process clearly, which only makes the mental illness worse because, so it's things like that. If you find yourself waking up and having a harder and harder time getting out of bed, that's a sign. If you've gone, 30 days and you haven't showered and you're in your pajamas and it's not 2020, that's a sign. Like, those are all things that should kind of make the cogs start spinning, that maybe I need to see a different kind of therapist, or I need to dig in a little deeper, or something more might be going on.
So how are you doing today? You said that you're far from at the end of the finish line, but like, how are you doing today?
I'm doing good. Recovering from trauma is a lot like recovering from addiction. You take it one day at a time. And it's even like the same, like the serenity prayer. That's the first thing you have to learn in trauma care, is to accept the things you can't change.
Yeah.
Change the things you can, and then know the difference. And so I'm good, but I don't think there's ever going to be a mountain, a top to this mountain. There's always going to be a place where I have to always watch out for my self-care, always be self-aware, always, be conscious of what I bring to a conversation or a relationship, because trauma counseling will ultimately get rid of a lot of the trauma symptoms. But there are just some things that may not disappear. So trying to think how to say it. I guess all right, normal, healthy people, and I know you know this, right? But like normal, healthy kids who grow up in a normal, healthy environment have the luxury, I'll say, in their youth of developing an identity, creating a sense of self, knowing what they like. If you grow up in an environment that, my family therapist used to always say I grew up in a war zone. And she would tell my parents, our house was a war zone. There was always yelling and screaming. It was the normal way of things. But so I didn't have a chance to get to know me because I was surviving. You go into survival mode. And that's what happens with trauma. So then you say diminished sense of self, and in some cases it's no sense of self. And that's where sometimes the harming comes into place, because I know for me, like I would cut or scratch because I needed to believe I was real. I felt like the Velveteen Rabbit. Like I needed to know I was real, because
Right.
I was numb.
Yeah, because that's what we do. We learn how to be numb to just survive. Yeah.
Yeah.
I can relate to much of what you're sharing, believe it or not, absolutely. So talk to us about, what are your non-negotiable self-care practices now?
Absolutely. Come hell or high water, I will get out of bed every day, no matter how crappy I feel. I could have 104 fever. I will get out of bed and make it down to the couch. I will not stay in bed all day. Never, no way, no how. I mean, and I had the chicken pox at 43 years old, and I went down the stairs. That's non-negotiable for me. Taking a shower is non-negotiable. And taking time for myself, whether it's 10 minutes of quiet time at night laying in bed, or most of my day is spent going through trauma work, and like really working on getting to, we have the big T's and the little T's, they call them, and which is, your huge traumas, and then like the little, like so-and-so picked on me in middle school kind of traumas. So I'm kind of just in the middle of working on that and erasing some of the T's, the little T's, and getting towards some of the bigger T's in that.
Got it. It's a journey. Yeah, it's a journey. And I think people need to hear that it doesn't have to be, oh, I have this complex routine that I have to do that takes an hour and a half. Like, if for you, the victory is the consistency and showing up for yourself by, just getting up and getting going and continuing to do the good work to help yourself heal.
Yeah, like those are my non-negotiables. I take care of my mental health by doing that, and I get up and get out of bed. Those are, and I eat, because one of the side effects, I was anorexic for 2 years, and it was hard. I had to come to grips with body image. I had to come to grips with a lot of things and deal with a tremendous amount of trauma around body image. But that's a steadfast, like I eat every day.
That's good.
But self-care is sometimes just as simple as doing what the doctor says.
Right. What else do you want us to know about trauma? What do you want, like, the average person to know about trauma that maybe they don't know?
This is going to sound like such a bad, like, 80s commercial, right? But like, it can happen to you. It may have already happened to you. Like, it could be the person sitting next to you. It could be the person sitting behind you. It could be you. Like, we think trauma is like few and far between, or like it only happens to people who go to war. But I was a housewife. I had trauma, and I had no freaking clue. I was just spinning my wheels in counseling, and you met me and you said I was a powerhouse. And during that time was like in the worst of trauma.
Wow.
So that's how well you hide it.
Yeah.
Like, so I brought that up just so people know that, like, you could have somebody who looks really high functioning and well, and they've got a serious trauma underneath.
So the thing that I want to talk about now is the fact that we all just lived through 15 months of a pandemic. And the conversation is, we will never know how much PTSD we all experienced for a long time, right? That'll slowly start to come out. And what I hear from people saying to me is, well, everyone endured it. Like, why am I any different? Like, we all went through this pandemic, right? And it's almost like they diminish it because we all went through it, but yet trauma is a very unique experience. So, like, you think about the magnitude. We lost loved ones. We lost our routine. We lost, in some cases, financial stability and employment. There's so many pieces of loss that occurred that it makes sense that so many people are going to struggle from PTSD.
And I'll even go one higher than that, Michelle, not to interrupt, but
no, go ahead.
Who are really, really high functioning, like the healthcare workers, the doctors, the nurses, like they've got serious, they may not have been stuck inside and quarantined, but you better believe they got trauma from the hard phone calls and all of that. So
yeah. So I guess my question to you and also my message is, just because we've all experienced it doesn't diminish your unique experience of what the COVID-19 pandemic was like for you. It was very unique for you, just like it was very unique for me. So any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that you got to know you, right? So for some people, it was really, really, really isolating and lonely, and that can lead you down a deep, dark hole. And there's ways around that with, virtual support groups and stuff like that. But if you're feeling lonely, go look for those. If you're quarantined and you're feeling lonely, go look for those, because they exist as a result of COVID. I think that everybody has PTSD from COVID. I truly do. I believe that absolutely everybody has some form of trauma from the year 2020. I really do. And it's just, how bad is it? And how much does it bother you? And if you, but don't diminish it, right? Like if it's something that really does bother you, then go talk to somebody about it. Don't not talk to somebody about it because you think it's no big deal. Like, but for some people, like, who are serious introverts, they loved COVID.
Yeah.
They loved it.
Yeah.
Like, they probably don't need to talk to somebody about that part of it.
Great. So you mentioned a couple of communities. What are some of the resources that helped you, that you leaned on, that could maybe help someone else out there who maybe they'll go get the book and read the book, or maybe they're starting to see trauma differently? But what other resources would you like to share?
Yeah. Well, definitely, like, start with The Body Keeps the Score. Like, you should absolutely start with that book. Everybody, even if you don't think you have trauma, it'll break down how stress affects your body. So it really is a brilliant book. Find a therapist, jump in, like, there's a validation process. So find yourself the right doctor and develop a good relationship. And then if you can't go to support groups in person, I go to a weekly live therapy, like group therapy session. I've been doing it for 3 years, and it's through the group that I go to, and we have group therapy every Wednesday night. So find something like that, because it really, really does help you feel less alone. And sometimes you'll hear somebody say something and you're like, oh my God, that's so, like, resonated with me. And then it makes it better for you.
Right. I'm not alone. I'm not the only one.
Yeah. And I'm not crazy. Like, I'm not out of my mind. Like, oh my God, other people have had this happen.
So there's been a lot of conversations around the barriers to getting a good therapist, and people, there's theories out there to get a therapist before you need a therapist, so that your mind is clear and you're not having to go through the vetting process when you really just need care and you have a rapport with them. What advice do you have for the person who's like, I tried to get a therapist, the person I went to was terrible, I'm done?
Keep trying.
Right.
Keep trying. Did you buy the first car you drove? Did you ride a bike the first time you got on it? Like, it's like any sport, anything. Like, you got to just keep putting yourself back in until you find the right fit. And I mean, I'm 43 and I've been in therapy since I was 12 years old. I met my therapist 3 years ago. So that's how many years of dipping my toe in the pond it took, because I knew something was wrong. I just didn't know how or why or what. So the only thing I would say to people is, don't stop. Just keep looking. And if you think you're at a stopping point, look for traumatologist. Change your focus. Change what you're looking for.
Good. Awesome. So you and I talked briefly before we came on here, we were talking about what's next for you, and you were talking about a book. What is next for you? I know you've emerged from your whole experience with this big heart that you just want to help people. Tell us what's next for you.
Yeah, book. Definitely a book, but the book it's going to take something because I kind of feel like I'm in the middle of the journey, right? So it's evolving, right? And we were talking earlier, like I'd love to do more podcasts. I would love to get in front of more people and just let more people hear. My goal is to normalize mental health, normalize trauma. Like when you hear the word trauma, it has such a stigma to it that it just bothers the hell out of me.
Right. Right.
But yeah, that's really my mission, is to take the stigma out of that. It's nothing to be embarrassed of.
So at the end of the day, what would you want your book to accomplish?
To let people know exactly that you can get past it, you can get through it. It's nothing to be embarrassed of, and that it's in a lot of ways very common. It, you know what I'm saying by that? Like it's more common than you think. So that's what I really want the book to say, is to normalize it.
Awesome. Well, we are at the end of our time. Do you have any other words of wisdom or advice that you want to leave with the audience who's here?
Oh God, no. I'm in no position to give anybody wisdom or advice. Live your best life, and you know what? Without integrity, nothing works is actually a true thing. Like story. When you actually get real with yourself, you can go from having everything you ever wanted in terms of material goods, being miserable, to being extremely poor and happier than you've ever been in your life. And that's the power of being authentic. So I think that's the only other missing piece. And I miss the hell out of seeing your face.
I miss you too, my dear. So good to have you. I can't thank you enough for spending an hour with me today. It's been
thank you.
Great to see you. I really appreciate your heart. I appreciate what you're up to, and I look forward to seeing what's next and watching you make a difference. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
All right.
All right. Bye.
Bye.